I am 96 years old, and I have spent 40 years asking myself one question that has no clean answer. Was I strong for staying, or was I simply too afraid to leave? There were 5 signals, 5 clear moments where the truth was standing directly in front of me, and I chose not to see a single one of them. Now, I don't want even one of you to ignore these signs the way I did, because what I'm about to tell you could save you years of silent regret. My name is Margaret Eleanor Hayes, born February 17, 1928, in Hartford, Connecticut. I married Richard Hayes on June 4, 1955, in a small church with ivory roses and 63 guests, and a man standing at the altar who smiled at me like I was the only thing in the room. I believed that smile completely. For 7 years I had no reason not to. Richard was handsome and charming and respected by everyone on Birchwood Lane and beyond. He worked at Callaway and Pierce Accounting on Webster Street, came home at 6 every evening, sat at the head of the table, helped with homework, fixed the back fence in summer without being asked. We had 4 children, Thomas, Anne, Robert, little June. From the outside, our life looked completely whole. And for a long time on the inside, it felt that way too. But I want to tell you something before I go further. Looking back now across 96 years of living, I understand exactly what those 5 signals were. Not because I was blind, but because some truths cost more than a woman with 4 children can afford to pay. And I ignored every single one of them. Richard and I built a good life on Birchwood Lane, the kind of life that looks exactly right from every angle you examine it. Sunday church, summer barbecues, children's laughter filling every room of that house from morning until bedtime. Richard coaching Thomas in the backyard on Saturday afternoons. Me in the kitchen with the window open and the radio playing softly. It felt real. It was real. Most of it. And that is the part that still sits heavy in me, even now at 96 years old. Because the good parts were genuinely good. Richard was a present father, a respected husband, a man the whole neighborhood looked up to. And I loved him, fully, without reservation. Which is exactly why the first signal hit me the way it did. It was the spring of 1962. Richard began coming home later than usual, 30 minutes, sometimes 40, always with a clean and reasonable explanation. Traffic on Webster Street, a client running late. Quarterly paperwork that simply could not wait. I nodded each time, kept his dinner warm, put the children to bed. But here is what I never told anyone. The explanations were never wrong exactly. They were just always slightly too smooth, like someone who had practiced them quietly on the drive home. I noticed that. I filed it away somewhere I did not intend to open again. But something small and cold had settled in my chest that spring, and it never fully left. Not once in 32 years. I told myself it was the pressure of his work. Men carried things differently back then. That is what we believed. That is what we were taught to believe. And so I believed it. But the spring of 1963 brought something I could not explain away quite as easily. Richard had worn the same cologne since the year we married, Old Spice, every morning without variation for 7 years. Then one Tuesday evening I lifted his shirt from the laundry basket and stopped. There was a second scent on the collar, lighter than his, floral, soft, completely wrong. I stood in that laundry room for a long moment, the washing machine humming beside me, the children's voices coming faintly from upstairs. I washed the shirt without saying a word, and then I washed it again. That was red flag 2. I buried it the same way I buried the first one, quietly, completely, without ceremony. But the third one was harder to bury. It was the summer of 1965. Richard spoke in his sleep one night. One word, barely a whisper in the dark. A name, Gloria. I lay completely still beside him, the ceiling above me, his breathing slow and steady, the clock ticking on the nightstand. I did not move for 2 full hours. By the time morning light came through the curtains, I had made a decision. I had not heard it. That was what I told myself. But a name heard in the dark at 2 in the morning does not simply disappear. It waits. And eventually, everything that waits finds its moment. I want you to understand something. By 1965, I was not a naive woman anymore. I was a mother of 4 children in a time when divorce meant shame and poverty, and your children paying the price for a truth you were brave enough to speak out loud. So I made a choice, not out of weakness, out of calculation. I decided what I could carry and what I could not, and I carried it. December of 1968 brought red flag 4. A Christmas card arrived, addressed only to Richard. No return name on the envelope. Feminine handwriting. Careful, deliberate. The kind of handwriting that belongs to someone who chose every letter slowly. I opened it before I could stop myself. One single line inside. This year was everything, always, G. I read it once, folded it carefully, placed it back in the envelope, walked to Richard's desk, and left it there without a word. He never mentioned it, neither did I. But G had a name now in my mind, and that name matched the one I had decided 2 years earlier that I had not heard. Then came red flag 5. Richard's mother passed in February of 1970. A bouquet arrived at the house the following morning. No card, no name, just white lilies. Expensive, perfectly arranged. The kind of flowers chosen by someone who knew Richard in a way that had nothing to do with me. I put them in a vase on the kitchen windowsill, served dinner at 6 o'clock, smiled at my children across that table, and somewhere between passing the bread and pouring the water, I made a decision that would cost me the next 23 years. I already knew everything. I just had not admitted it yet. I confronted Richard on a Thursday evening in the spring of 1971. The children were asleep. The house was completely still. I had waited for that stillness deliberately. I sat across from him at the kitchen table with my hands folded and my voice steady, and I said the name out loud for the first time. Gloria. Richard did not flinch. He did not deny it, did not reach for my hand, did not offer a single word of explanation. He simply looked at me across that kitchen table with the same calm expression he wore at the head of every family dinner for 16 years, and said 7 words. Margaret, think carefully about what you want to do next. Not an apology, not a confession, a calculation. dressed up as concern. I sat with those 7 words for a long time. The refrigerator hummed, the clock ticked. Upstairs, little June was 6 years old and completely asleep and entirely unaware that her entire world was sitting on the edge of a decision being made at the kitchen table directly below her bedroom. I thought about Thomas, Anne, Robert, little June. I thought about 1971 and what the word divorce meant for a woman with 4 children and no income, and a society that would quietly blame her for the failure of her own marriage. And I made the hardest decision of my life. I stood up from that table, washed the 2 cups in the sink, turned off the kitchen light, and went upstairs to check on my children, one by one, all 4 of them. I stood in each doorway a long moment, watching them breathe in the dark, and I understood with complete clarity what I was choosing to protect and what I was choosing to lose. I never spoke Richard's name to him with that kind of weight again, not once in 23 more years. Some women leave to save themselves. I stayed to save everyone else. Whether that was strength or sacrifice, I still cannot fully answer. And I have had 50 years to think about it. Richard died on a Tuesday morning in March of 1994, quietly, in the same bed where he had spoken another woman's name in his sleep 29 years earlier. I held his hand at the end, not because I had forgiven everything, but because 40 years of a life lived together does not disappear simply because part of it was built on a lie. We buried him on a gray Friday afternoon at Birchwood Cemetery. Thomas and Robert carried the casket. Anne held my arm the entire service. Little June, who was no longer little, stood beside me and wept in the way children weep for fathers they believed in completely. I did not weep. I had used those tears in private across 23 years of silence. There were none left for a graveside. Then something happened that I was not prepared for. After the service, 3 women approached me with quiet condolences and wet eyes. I did not know 2 of them. The 3rd one I recognized immediately. Not from a photograph, not from a name, just from the way Richard had once said a single word in the dark. Gloria. She was elegant, composed, genuinely grieving. She took my hand in both of hers and said she was so deeply sorry for my loss. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I shook her hand firmly, said thank you, and turned back to my children. Because that is the only place I ever truly belonged in that story. Not in Richard's heart, not in his secrets, not in the version of our life he was living behind my back, but in every school morning, every dinner at 6, every darkened doorway where I stood watching 4 children breathe and chose them again. I am 96 years old, and I want to tell you something that took me a lifetime to understand. Dignity is not something another person can take from you, even when they spend 30 years trying. You simply keep it for yourself. I kept mine every single day, and not one of those 5 red flags I chose to ignore ever changed that, not even the last one. I stayed silent for 39 years, so my children would never feel the weight of what I carried alone. If this story touched you, please subscribe so no one has to suffer alone. Tell me in the comments, did I stay for my children? Or did I stay because leaving was simply too frightening to face?